At 65 years old, I discovered that the most satisfying form of revenge isn't born from a moment of passion, but is meticulously crafted with the cold, hard tools of the law. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. My name is Arthur Whitmore, and this is the story of how I systematically dismantled the life of the woman who took my daughter from me and believed she had gotten away with it completely. I was in the hallway, adjusting the knot of my silk tie in the gilded mirror, when the sharp buzz of my phone cut through the evening's profound silence like a shard of glass. Something in my gut clenched. A familiar, unwelcome sensation that always preceded a seismic shift in my world. My own reflection looked back at me. Silver hair, combed neatly back from my temples, a charcoal suit that brought out the gray in my eyes, and the antique watch, a family heirloom from my own father, resting on my wrist. At 65, I still presented a distinguished figure, though it was less about looks and more about a certain bearing I carried. Dignity, my dear departed wife used to say, was my most defining quality. I was due at my son Adam's house in less than half an hour. He had, after many months of strained silence, finally offered a peace treaty following his marriage to Grace Turner. Tonight was supposed to be a dinner of reconciliation, an opportunity to repair the fissures that had fractured our relationship since he'd chosen her despite my deeply rooted misgivings. The phone vibrated again, insistent. The name, Richard Hale, my attorney, illuminated the screen. "Richard?" I answered, my tone formal. "This had better be important. I'm just about to head out for dinner with Adam." "Arthur." His voice was tight, laced with an urgency that bordered on breathlessness. "Do not go to that dinner. Don't go anywhere near Grace Turner until you and I have spoken." My hand moved reflexively to my chest, my fingers finding the smooth crystal of my watch. "What on earth are you talking about?" "I need you to take a seat, Arthur." "I don't need to sit, Richard," I countered. "I need you to tell me why you're calling me 20 minutes before I'm meant to be mending fences with my only son." A heavy pause hung in the air. In the mirror, I watched the way the evening light cast long shadows across my face. I'd always been told I had a strong presence, a stoicism that I never truly valued until I learned how it could be weaponized. "The zoning variance case I've been handling," Richard began, "the one involving the old Northwood paper mill. While I was digging through archived police files to confirm some old property lines, I stumbled onto something about Danielle. Danielle, my firstborn, my brilliant daughter, gone for 15 years now, the victim of a hit-and-run driver who had vanished into the darkness like a phantom. The investigation had turned cold in a matter of months, leaving me with a silent, simmering rage and a grave to tend to every Sunday. "What about Danielle?" My voice fell, becoming a low, dangerous whisper. "I found the original witness interviews, Arthur. The ones the department claimed were misplaced. There was a witness who saw the driver get out of the car. He gave a perfect description, right down to a very specific scar on her left hand, the result of a kitchen accident she'd mentioned once. I knew that scar. I had seen it just a few months ago, its pale, crescent shape stark against her skin as she held my son's arm during their wedding vows. Grace Turner was behind the wheel of the car that killed your daughter. The word struck me with the force of a physical impact. I braced myself against the antique mahogany table in the hall, my knuckles turning white against the polished wood. In the mirror, I saw my expression transform, not with a fresh wave of grief, but with something far colder, far more resolute. "Are you certain?" "I've spent the last 3 days triple, checking every last detail. It's her, Arthur. The witness's description is a perfect match." Vehicle registration records from that period confirm she owned a silver sedan, the same make and model described in the report. Even a partial license plate number aligns with what was recorded at the scene. I squeezed my eyes shut, and an image of Danielle flooded my mind. She was 22, home from college for the weekend, laughing on the phone about a boy she liked, promising she'd call me back after the concert. She was on her way home from that concert when Grace Turner decided her own convenience was worth more than my daughter's life. "Does Adam know?" I asked, my voice flat. "I can't imagine he does. How could he? How could he indeed? My son, married to the woman who had murdered his own sister. My son, who had defended Grace against my gut feelings, accusing me of being incapable of letting him be happy. My son, who had, in his blindness, chosen a killer over his own father's intuition. Richard, I want everything, every report, every photograph, every single piece of paper you found. Arthur, what are you planning on doing?" I opened my eyes and met my own gaze in the mirror. The man staring back was no longer just a grieving father. He was an instrument of delayed justice. "Justice?" I said with chilling simplicity. "I am planning justice." I ended the call and immediately dialed my son. "Dad, are you almost here? Grace is making her famous lasagna." "Adam, my boy, I'm terribly sorry," I said, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. "I've been struck by a sudden splitting headache. I'm afraid I won't be able to make it tonight." "Oh no. Do you need me to come over? I can bring something for you." "No, son. All I need is some rest. We'll reschedule very soon." After hanging up, I stood motionless in my hallway for a long time, my eyes fixed on the silver-framed photograph of Danielle on the side table. She was so vibrant, so full of potential and light. In the picture, she was smiling at something just out of frame, her entire life stretching before her like a vast open road. Grace Turner had permanently closed that road. I walked to the bar in my study and poured myself a measure of scotch, a 5-year-old single malt I kept for special occasions. If I was about to orchestrate a woman's complete and utter ruin, I might as well do it with a clear head. As I sipped the amber liquid, I contemplated the nature of vengeance. Most people imagine it as a fleeting, hot-blooded emotion, a fire that consumes itself quickly. They are profoundly mistaken. True, meaningful revenge is a craft. It demands patience, meticulous planning, and an unwavering dedication to its final, perfect execution. Grace Turner had robbed me of 15 years of peace. She had taken my daughter. She had shattered my marriage because the loss of Danielle had killed my wife as surely as the cancer that eventually took her. And now, this woman was living a blissful domestic life with my son, her monstrous secret buried deep within dusty police archives. But secrets have a way of clawing their way to the surface, especially when the right person starts digging. I opened my laptop, the screen's glow illuminating my determined face, and began to draft a plan. Richard would supply the legal ammunition, but I needed more than just that. I needed to find the original witnesses, corroborate every piece of evidence, and construct a case so impenetrable that even the most cunning defense attorney couldn't find a single crack. Above all, I needed to be patient. Grace Turner had lived for a decade and a half under the assumption that she had gotten away with it. I could afford to wait a little longer to prove just how catastrophically wrong she was. I lifted my glass toward Danielle's photograph. "Soon, my sweet girl," I whispered to her memory. "Daddy's going to make this right." The scotch tasted like the beginning of victory. I didn't sleep a wink that night. Instead, I sat in my leather armchair in the study, a cup of tea going cold on the coaster beside me, and forced myself to dredge up every painful detail of the day Danielle died. For 15 long years, I had actively worked to soften those memories, to dull their razor-sharp edges with the passage of time. Now, I needed them to be as sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. It was October 15th, 2010, a crisp Saturday evening, the air carrying the scent of autumn leaves and the distant promise of winter. Danielle had called me that afternoon from her dorm room at the university. "Dad, I'm going to the concert downtown with Michael and some friends. Want to join us? You know that music gives me a headache, darling. But you have a wonderful time." "I will. Love you." "I love you too." Those were the last words I ever heard from my daughter. The phone call that shattered my world came at 11:47 p.m. I remember the exact time because I had been lying awake, a vague disquiet stirring in my chest, the way it often does for parents when their children are out late. "Mr. Whitmore, this is Officer Patricia Wells with the City Police Department. I'm calling about your daughter, Danielle Whitmore." The rest of that conversation exists in my memory as a collection of jagged fragments, each one sharp enough to draw blood. "Critical condition, General Hospital. Come immediately." I remember shaking my wife awake, the frantic, silent drive through deserted city streets, the sterile chemical smell of the emergency room that seemed to permeate everything. But what I recall with harrowing clarity was the face of the doctor, Dr. Martinez, a young man who looked barely older than Danielle herself. He had compassionate eyes, but they were powerless to soften the blow of his words. "I am so sorry. We did everything we could." My wife collapsed into a nearby chair, a sound of pure anguish escaping her lips. But I remained standing, rigid. I had to see Danielle. I had to hold her hand one last time. They tried to warn me, to prepare me for the sight, but nothing could have braced me for what Grace Turner had done to my beautiful girl. Danielle's face was, by some cruel twist of fate, unmarked. If you looked only at her face, you could almost pretend she was peacefully asleep. But the rest of her body told the horrific truth. She was struck from behind, Dr. Martinez explained in a hushed tone. The impact threw her nearly 30 feet. The driver never even hit the brakes. Never even hit the brakes. Even now, 15 years later, those words ignite a fire in my veins that makes my hands tremble with a cold, contained fury. The police arrived while I was still clutching Danielle's cold hand, still praying for a miracle I knew would never come. Detective Colin Myers was the lead on the case, a weary-looking man in his 40s who had clearly seen too much of the city's dark side. "Mr. Whitmore, I know how difficult this is, but I need to ask you a few things about Danielle's evening." I answered his questions robotically. The concert at the university amphitheater, walking back to her dorm with friends, cutting through the parking lot behind Morrison's gas station to save time. "Was Danielle drinking tonight?" "No," I said, my voice firm. Danielle rarely drank. She was in training for the city marathon. Detective Myers jotted something in his notepad. "What about her route home? Did she always use that shortcut?" "I don't know. I imagine so. It would have saved her a 10-minute walk. The witnesses we've spoken to saw a silver sedan leaving the scene at a high rate of speed," he continued. "No one got a license plate, but we're checking the area for any security cameras." Security cameras. A tiny flicker of hope ignited in my chest. Surely some camera, somewhere, had captured an image that would lead us to Danielle's killer. That sliver of hope was what carried me through the agony of planning a funeral, of selecting a casket for my 22-year-old daughter, of choosing an outfit she would never get to wear. It sustained me through the memorial service, where Danielle's friends shared stories of her infectious laughter, her kindness, her aspirations of becoming a journalist. But hope is a fragile thing. No usable footage from the security cameras. Detective Myers informed me a few weeks later, his voice heavy with regret. The cameras that had a clear view of the parking lot were either out of order or the footage was too grainy to be of any use. What about witnesses? Someone must have seen the driver. He hesitated for a moment. There was one witness, a clerk at the gas station. He saw a woman come into the station shortly after the estimated time of the incident. He said she seemed agitated, possibly intoxicated, and he noticed what he thought was blood on her jacket. My pulse quickened. Did he get a good look at her? He did, but she paid in cash, gave no name, and the security camera inside the station was also malfunctioning that night. Without more to go on, it's a dead end. What did this woman look like? Detective Myers flipped through his notes. White female, early 20s, blonde hair, about 5'6". The clerk distinctly remembered a scar on her left hand. Said it looked like an old, pale burn mark. I committed every single detail to memory, filing it away in the archives of my grief. At the time, they were just fragments of a puzzle I couldn't solve. Now, I knew they formed a perfect portrait of my son's wife. The investigation stalled and eventually went cold. Detective Myers did his best to sound optimistic, but the defeat was plain in his eyes. These cases are always tough, Mr. Whitmore. Hit and run drivers are notoriously difficult to track down. Without physical evidence from the car or a solid ID on the driver, we're effectively searching for a ghost. And the blood the clerk saw could have been anything, he sighed. Maybe she'd been an offender bender. Maybe it wasn't even blood, could have been ketchup paint. We just don't know. But I knew. I knew it in that deep primal place where a parent's intuition resides. The woman who killed Danielle had walked into that gas station with my daughter's blood on her clothes, and she had simply walked away, disappearing into the night. My wife, Eleanor, never truly recovered. She tried, for my sake, but the grief consumed her from the inside out. She drank more wine in the evenings, slept less, and would spend hours just staring at Danielle's photographs, with an expression of such profound sorrow it felt like a fresh wound every time I saw it. Her first heart attack came 18 months after the funeral. The second, 2 years after that, was fatal. I became a widower at 50, having already lost my only child. The house, once alive with laughter and the vibrant chaos of family, became a silent, hollow mausoleum. But now, sitting in my study 15 years later, I understood that the silence hadn't been empty. It had been waiting for this exact moment, when the final, damning piece of the puzzle would click into place. Grace Turner thought she had buried her secret alongside Danielle. She believed that time, and a change of name, because I was certain Turner wasn't the name she'd used 15 years ago, had granted her immunity. She was about to receive a very harsh education to the contrary. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Colin Myers' number. He'd been retired for 5 years, but we'd kept in sporadic touch. He was one of the few people who understood the depth of my loss. It was well past midnight, but this could not wait. Colin, it's Arthur Whitmore. I apologize for the late hour, but I need to see you. It's about Danielle's case. Arthur? Good heavens, it's been years. What's wrong? I found her, Colin, I said, my voice steady and cold as steel. I found the woman who killed my daughter. The next morning, I dressed with meticulous care. When one is about to commence the systematic dismantling of another person's life, one's appearance is of paramount importance. I selected a sharp navy suit that made my silver hair appear almost metallic, pairing it with my late wife's pearl cufflinks and a matching tie pin. The overall effect was one of quiet elegance, understated authority, and absolute resolve. I had arranged to meet Colin Myers at a small coffee shop in the city, a neutral ground where our conversation wouldn't be overheard. He was already there when I arrived, looking older than his 60-odd years, but still possessing the sharp, observant posture of a man who'd spent his life looking for trouble. "You look well, Arthur," he said, his handshake firm as we slid into a corner booth. "I heard about Eleanor. I'm sorry I couldn't be there." "Thank you, Colin. She never really got over losing Danielle." He nodded, his expression somber. "I've seen it happen more than once. When parents lose a child, sometimes the grief just takes everything." I waited for the waitress to deliver our coffees before I opened my briefcase and laid out the documents Richard had sent me. "Tell me everything you remember about the gas station witness," I began. Colin's eyes, once weary, now sharpened with professional focus as he scanned the old police reports. "Frank Delaney worked the night shift at the Morrisons on Elm Street. He was adamant about the woman he saw. Agitated, smelled of alcohol, had blood on her sleeve. But the detail that always stuck with me was the scar on her left hand. He described it as a pale, crescent-shaped burn mark, distinctive enough that he was sure he'd recognize it again. Would you recognize Frank Delaney if you saw him today?" "I think so." "Why?" I slid a photograph across the table, a candid shot from Adam and Grace's wedding. Grace was linking her arm through my son's, her left hand in clear view, displaying the unmistakable crescent-shaped scar. Colin froze, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. "Arthur, please don't tell me this is your son's wife." "Her name is Grace Turner," I finished for him, though I highly doubt that was her name 15 years ago. Colin studied the photo, his face growing darker by the second. "The timing fits. She would have been in her early 20s when Danielle was killed. I need your help, Colin. I need you to help me find Frank Delaney." "Arthur," his voice was low, cautionary. "I understand your need for answers, but you cannot take matters into your own hands." "I have no intention of taking the law into my own hands," I replied, my voice calm and level. "I intend to place it in the right hands, the hands that should have closed this case 15 years ago if the investigation hadn't been so mishandled." Colin flinched, stung by the accusation. "That's not fair, isn't it? You had a witness who could identify the killer, and you let the case die because of a few broken security cameras. We pursued every lead we had. You pursued every easy lead. You didn't dig. And because of that, my daughter's killer has been living in freedom for a decade and a half. So free, in fact, that she managed to marry into my family. The silence between us was thick with the weight of years of unspoken frustration. Finally, Colin let out a long sigh. "What exactly are you asking of me?" "Help me find Frank Delaney. Help me build a case that will hold up in court. Help me get justice for Danielle. And if I refuse?" I met his gaze without flinching. "Then I will do it alone, but I would prefer to have the benefit of your experience. You know how these things work, what kind of evidence a prosecutor needs. And more importantly, you know you failed my daughter once. This is your chance to make it right." He was quiet for a long time, staring down into the black coffee as if the answers were swirling there. When he finally looked up, the decision was made. Frank Delaney still lives in town. He's retired now, runs a small auto repair shop. He might remember that night. The description he gave was so specific. If this Turner woman is the one, Frank will be able to identify her. What's the first step? We have to move very carefully. If she gets any inkling that we're looking into her, she could bolt. People who've been hiding from a crime for this long are usually experts at disappearing. I thought of Adam, so happy, so oblivious, planning a future with the woman who had murdered his sister. The bitter irony of it all was a burn in my throat. "She won't run," I said with certainty. "She's too comfortable, too entrenched in her new life. People like Grace Turner don't just hide from their past. They rewrite it until they convince themselves the crime never even happened. You sound like you've got her figured out. I've been observing her for months, trying to pinpoint the source of my intense dislike. Now I understand. On some subconscious level, I think I always knew what she was. Colin took out a small notebook. First, we need to establish her identity from 15 years ago. Turner could be a legal name change or an alias. We need to find out where she was living at the time of the accident, the exact car she owned, her connection to the university area, her entire history. Precisely. And it all needs to be done without her or anyone in her circle knowing. That includes your son. The reminder was like a splash of cold water. Adam, my son, whose wife was pregnant with the child of his sister's killer. Adam cannot know, I agreed. Not until we have an airtight case. He would warn her, even unintentionally. This is going to be incredibly difficult for you, Arthur. Pretending everything is fine, spending time with them, all while you're building a case against her. A small, mirthless smile touched my lips. Colin, I have been pretending for 15 years. Pretending the grief wasn't a constant weight on my soul. Pretending I had found peace. Pretending I had moved on. I believe I can manage a few more months of pretense, especially for a cause like this. Colin shook his head slowly. You're a different man than you were back then. Losing a child changes you, I said softly. Losing a wife to that same grief changes you, but discovering that your daughter's killer has been sitting across from you at your own dinner table, that changes you most of all. We spent another hour mapping out our strategy. Colin would leverage his old contacts within the police department to discreetly pull records on Grace's background. I would maintain my role as the dutiful father-in-law, gathering any small bits of information I could. As we were about to leave, Colin put a hand on my arm. Arthur, I have to ask you something, and I need a straight answer. If this doesn't pan out, if we can't build a strong enough case, if the statute of limitations is an issue, if she lawyers up and walks free, what will you do then? I looked him squarely in the eye. Then I will find another way, I said, my voice low and even. Because Grace Turner is going to pay for what she did to Danielle. One way or another, she is going to pay. I walked out of that coffee shop feeling a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. For the first time since Danielle's death, I had a mission that went beyond simple endurance. Grace Turner had spent 15 years cocooned in a false sense of security. That security was about to become her greatest weakness. The weeks that followed demanded a performance of immense skill. I had to bury the grieving father, who had just uncovered a monstrous truth and become the very image of a reconciling, supportive father-in-law. Every smile I offered had to seem genuine. Every warm gesture, heartfelt. It was utterly exhausting, but I had spent years mastering the art of concealing my true emotions. The first major test came just 3 days after my meeting with Colin. Adam called, his voice filled with a lightness that pained me to hear. Dad, I know you were under the weather the other night, but Grace and I were hoping you'd come for dinner this weekend. How about Saturday? That sounds wonderful, son. I'm feeling much better. Great. Grace has been worried she hasn't made the best impression on you. She really wants us all to be a family. Grace wanted us to be a family. The woman who had obliterated my family now wanted to be a part of it. The sheer gall was staggering. I'm sure we'll get along just fine, I said, my voice infused with a paternal warmth that was pure fiction. Should I bring a bottle of wine? Just bring yourself. And Dad, thanks for giving her a chance. I know you had your doubts, but once you get to know her, you'll see what I see. What he saw. a charming facade, an attentive nature, the kind of romantic displays that blind a young man in love, obscuring the guilt they are designed to conceal. Saturday was a crisp, perfect autumn day. I dressed with care in a soft cashmere sweater and tailored trousers. The objective was to appear approachable and kind, the sort of father-in-law one could confide in. Adam and Grace lived in a pleasant colonial in a good neighborhood, not so extravagant as to raise suspicions, but comfortable enough to project an image of success. It looked like the perfect home for a young couple starting their lives together. Grace answered the door, her smile as bright and practiced as ever. She was attractive in a conventional way, with blonde hair, warm eyes, and a slender build. If I hadn't known the monster that lurked beneath, I might have found her charming myself. "Arthur, it's so wonderful to see you. Please, come in." As she took my coat, my eyes were drawn to the scar on her left hand, the pale, crescent-shaped mark. 15 years ago, Frank Delaney had described that very scar to the police. Now, it was attached to the hand reaching for my coat. "Thank you, Grace. It's good to be here." Her smile widened. Adam emerged from the kitchen, flowers smudged on his apron, happiness radiating from him. Grace was about 5 months pregnant, and the sight of my son's contentment, so cruelly misplaced, was a physical ache in my chest. "Dad, you look great. How are you feeling?" "Much better, son. And you two look wonderful." "The morning sickness has finally passed," Grace said, laughing. "Adam keeps joking I'm going to redecorate the whole house before the baby arrives." "Just the nursery would be fine," Adam chimed in, looking at his wife with pure adoration. For a fleeting moment, I questioned if it was possible for someone to harbor such a dark secret and still be capable of genuine love. Then I pictured Danielle's broken body, and my resolve hardened like granite. "So, tell me about your plans for the nursery," I said, taking a seat on their sofa. "Have you found out if it's a boy or a girl?" "We want it to be a surprise," Adam said, placing a hand on Grace's stomach. "But we're thinking of a neutral color palette, soft greens and yellows." "That sounds lovely. What about names?" Adam and Grace exchanged a look, one of those private, meaningful glances between a couple. "We've been talking about family names," Grace said carefully. "Names that would honor the people who are important to us." "For a girl," Adam said, his voice soft with emotion, "we were thinking of naming her Danielle. You know, after my sister." The air in the room suddenly felt thin, the silence absolute. I felt the blood rush from my face, and I had to consciously still my trembling hands. Across from me, Grace's face had gone pale, her eyes fixed on a point just over my shoulder. "Danielle," I repeated, the name a ghost on my lips. "I hope that's okay," Adam said quickly. "I know it might be painful, but it was actually Grace's idea. She said that even though she never met Danielle, she knows how much she meant to our family, and she thought it would be a beautiful tribute." Grace's idea. The woman who had killed my daughter now proposed naming her own child after her victim. I stared at Grace, trying to read the thoughts behind her carefully constructed mask. "I think," I said slowly, choosing my words with extreme care, "that Danielle would be deeply honored to know her name was being carried on by a new generation." "Really?" Adam's face was flooded with relief. "I was so worried it would be too much." "It's perfect, son. Absolutely perfect." And it was perfect, in the most profoundly twisted sense imaginable. Grace thought she was making a clever, strategic move, playing the part of the devoted daughter-in-law. In reality, she had just handed me the ultimate motivation to ensure her complete and total destruction. The sheer, psychopathic audacity of it left me breathless. Dinner was a blur of polite conversation as I meticulously observed her every move. I watched her hands, her mannerisms, filing away every detail. When Adam went to the kitchen to get dessert, I saw my chance. "Grace, I hope you don't mind me asking," I began, "but Adam mentioned you don't speak much about your past or your family." A flicker of something alarm crossed her face before it vanished. "Oh, it's not a secret. My childhood just wasn't very happy. My parents passed away when I was a teenager, and I spent some time in the foster system. It's not the kind of thing one brings up at dinner parties. I'm very sorry to hear that. That must have been incredibly difficult." It was a long time ago. I prefer to focus on the future, on Adam and our growing family. Of course. You seem so remarkably well adjusted for someone who has endured so much. I was lucky. I had some good teachers, and a scholarship to college really changed my life. Which college did you attend? State University. I studied business. State University. The same university Danielle had attended. The campus she had been walking home from when Grace Turner had mowed her down. What a small world, I said, my voice light. Danielle went to State as well. You two might have been there around the same time. Grace's hand tightened on her water glass. Really? What did she study? Journalism. She wanted to be an investigative reporter. I paused, watching her face intently. She was killed in a hit and run just off campus. Did Adam ever tell you about that? He mentioned he'd lost a sister. I didn't know the specifics. A blatant lie. Adam had told her everything. I had seen him showing her Danielle's old photos, sharing stories of their childhood. It was 15 years ago this month, I continued, pressing on. She was walking home when a driver struck her and just kept going. They never found the person responsible. That's horrible. I can't imagine how devastating that must have been for your family. It was. But you know, they say the truth always finds a way to the surface. I have faith that one day we'll find out what really happened that night. Grace nodded, but I saw the subtle tremor in her hand as she reached for her glass. The rest of the evening was spent looking at nursery catalogs and discussing holiday plans. I played my part to perfection, and by the time I was ready to leave, I could see the relief on both their faces. As Grace walked me to the door, she touched my arm. "Arthur, I just want you to know how much it means to Adam that you're finally accepting our relationship. He was so worried you didn't approve of me. All I want is for my son to be happy," I replied. "And I can see that he is. He is. I love him more than anything. I would do anything to protect him and our child." I met her gaze. "I believe you would, Grace. I think you're the kind of woman who is capable of almost anything to protect what's important to you." She smiled, mistaking my words for a compliment. Driving home, I allowed myself a grim smile. Grace Turner had spent the evening trying to win me over, and she believed she had succeeded. She had no idea that every word she uttered was another nail in her coffin. She had confirmed her attendance at State University during the exact time Danielle was killed. She had lied about knowing the details of my daughter's death, and she had revealed an arrogance so profound it would undoubtedly be her undoing. Grace Turner wanted to name her daughter Danielle. By the time I was finished with her, she'd be lucky to see that child outside of a prison visiting room. Colin called me 2 days later, his voice crackling with excitement. "I found Frank Delaney," he said. "And Arthur, you are going to want to hear this." We met at the same coffee shop. This time, Colin came armed with a thick manila folder. "Frank Delaney is 58 now," he began, spreading documents across the table. "He has a sharp memory and a very personal reason to remember that night with perfect clarity. It was the anniversary of his own daughter's death. She had been killed by a drunk driver 3 years prior. My heart hammered against my ribs. He'll talk to us? He'll do more than that. When I told him we might have found the person he saw, he immediately agreed to look at a photo lineup. But that's not all. Colin slid a photocopy of an old document toward me. I did some digging into Grace Turner. You were right to be suspicious. Turner wasn't her name 15 years ago. What was it? Grace Townsend. She legally changed her name 6 months after Danielle's death, citing a desire for a fresh start. The timing is damning. Grace Townsend. The name felt like a lead weight in my mouth. What else did you find? In 2010, Grace Townsend was a 21-year-old student at State University. She'd been in trouble with the law before. 2 DUIs, both pleaded down to reckless driving. Her mother was a high-powered attorney who made sure she never faced any real consequences. Her mother. I thought of Grace's fabricated story of being an orphan. Another calculated lie. Teresa Townsend, Colin continued, senior partner at Townsend, Mills and Associates, one of the most expensive firms in the state. Grace wasn't a tragic orphan. She was a spoiled child whose mother cleaned up all her messes. The pieces were falling into place with sickening precision. Grace hadn't been some panicked young woman who made a mistake. She was a repeat offender who knew exactly what she was doing when she left my daughter to die. What about the car? Colin's smile was grim. Registered to Grace Townsend, a 2008 silver Honda Civic. She reported it stolen 2 days after Danielle's death and filed an insurance claim for a total loss. Stolen, I said flatly. How convenient. The car, along with any evidence, simply vanishes. My guess is her mother helped her cover the whole thing up. Teresa Townsend would have known exactly how to make a car disappear, how to coach her daughter for police interviews, how to create a smokescreen of doubt. But we have Frank Delaney. We do, and Frank Delaney has been waiting 15 years to identify the person who took a young life, just like his own daughter's. A wave of vindication washed over me. After all these years, the truth was finally within my grasp. What is our next move? We need to arrange for Frank to see Grace in person. A photograph after all this time might not be enough for a positive ID in court, but if he sees her face to face, he'll know. How do we manage that without raising her suspicions? Colin had already formulated a plan. Grace works at Davidson Financial Services, doesn't she? Frank is looking for financial advice for his retirement. It's the perfect cover for him to schedule an appointment. And if he identifies her, then we take everything we have to the district attorney's office. With Frank's eyewitness testimony, the name change, the insurance fraud, it will be more than enough to secure an arrest warrant. I felt a cold, satisfied smile form on my face. What charges would she be facing? Vehicular manslaughter, leaving the scene of an accident, insurance fraud, and possibly conspiracy, if we can prove her mother was involved. Grace Turner could be looking at 15 to 20 years in prison. 20 years. Grace would be in her 50s when she was released. Her child would be an adult. The life she had built on the foundation of my daughter's grave would be nothing but a distant memory. Frank Delaney was a weathered man in his late 50s, with calloused hands and eyes that held the quiet sorrow of a parent who had lost a child. We met at a diner near his appointment, going over the plan one last time. I've replayed that night in my head for 15 years. Frank told me, his voice raspy with old anger. The girl who came into my station, she was terrified, reeked of alcohol, and had blood on her clothes. I knew in my gut something awful had just happened. You're sure you'll recognize her? Mr. Whitmore, I remember every single detail. It was the anniversary of my Sarah's death. I was already on edge when that young woman stumbled in, shaking and stained with blood. The image was burned into my mind. If Grace Turner is Grace Townsend, I will know it the moment I lay eyes on her. At 2:30 p.m., I took a seat in the coffee shop across the street from Davidson Financial Services, my gaze fixed on the building's entrance. My hands were steady, but my heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. At exactly 3, Frank walked through the doors. The next 45 minutes were the longest of my life. I watched people come and go, tried to read a newspaper, and checked my watch every 30 seconds. Finally, Frank emerged. Even from across the street, I could see the grim certainty etched on his face. We met back at the diner. "It's her," he said, his voice low and firm. "Grace Turner is without a doubt the woman I saw that night." Relief washed over me with such force I had to grip the table to steady myself. "You are absolutely certain?" "Positive. The scar on her hand is identical." But it was more than that. When I mentioned I used to live near the university 15 years ago, her whole demeanor shifted. She got twitchy, started shuffling papers on her desk. The moment I told her I used to work at Morrison's gas station, her face went white as a sheet. She tried to cover it with a cough, but I saw it. She remembers me, Mr. Whitmore. She remembers that night just as clearly as I do. Did she say anything else? She started asking Keith a strained pleasantry. She had questions about my work schedule back then, if I remembered many customers. Then she made some comment about how tragic it was that young people sometimes got hurt near the campus late at night. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. "What do we do now?" Frank asked. "Now," I said, a cold finality in my tone, "we call Colin, and we set up a meeting with the district attorney." I drove home in a fog of rage and anticipation. After 15 years of living in the shadow of uncertainty, I finally had the proof I needed. Grace Turner was going to pay. But first, I had to endure one last dinner with my son and his wife. One last performance, where I would sit across from my daughter's killer and pretend I knew nothing. I chose my attire for that final dinner as a general would choose his weapons. A simple black suit, elegant but somber, my late wife's pearl cufflinks, and my wedding band, a stark reminder that Grace had not only stolen my daughter, she had also made me a widower. Grace answered the door with her usual bright smile, but I could see the fine lines of tension around her eyes. Frank's visit had clearly unnerved her. "Arthur, you look wonderful, as always." "Thank you, Grace. And how are you? You look a bit tired." "Just a long day at the office. Client meetings." Her hand wasn't quite steady as she took my coat. The evening began with a strained pleasantry. Adam, oblivious, showed me the latest ultrasound photos of his unborn child. I stared at the grainy image of Grace's baby, Danielle's niece or nephew, conceived by the woman who had killed her. The irony was a physical weight in the room. Then Grace's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, and her face tightened. "Excuse me, I just need to reply to this." As she typed, I caught a glimpse of the sender. Teresa. Her mother. The attorney who had orchestrated the cover-up. The visible portion of the message read, "Need to talk about the situation. Call me tonight." The situation. Her past was finally catching up to her. Throughout dinner, her phone buzzed repeatedly. With each message, she grew more agitated. "Grace, is everything all right?" Adam finally asked, concern in his voice. "It's fine, darling. Just a complicated client issue." As I was preparing to leave, her phone rang. She answered it immediately, stepping into the adjoining room but not far enough away. Her hushed, frantic voice carried clearly. "Mom, I told you not to call the house. No, I don't think he suspects anything." "A gas station clerk? Are you sure? How in the world did they find him after all these years?" Adam froze, his face paling as he listened. Grace's voice grew louder, more panicked. "We buried this 15 years ago. I know what you said, but what if things have changed? What do you mean they have evidence?" She reappeared in the doorway, her face ashen, realizing we had overheard. That was nothing, she said, her voice unconvincing. Just work drama. Work drama that involves gas station clerks and buried evidence? I asked, my voice sharp. The silence that followed was suffocating. Adam looked from me to his wife, the terrible understanding slowly dawning in his eyes. Grace, he said slowly. What evidence? What happened 15 years ago? Her carefully constructed world was crumbling around her. She looked at me, and in her eyes, I saw the exact moment she realized who had brought this upon her. Not the police, not some random twist of fate. Me, the father who never gave up. How long have you known? She asked me, her voice barely a whisper. Known what? Adam demanded, his voice rising. Grace, what is he supposed to know? I met her gaze, letting all the years of pain and anger show in my eyes. I've known for exactly 1 week, since my lawyer found the police reports that should have put you in prison 15 years ago. Police reports about what? Adam was almost shouting now. I turned to my son, my heart breaking for the pain I was about to inflict, but it had to be done. About the night your wife killed your sister. The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Grace swayed, and Adam recoiled from her as if she were on fire. That's impossible, he stammered. Grace wasn't even in this state when Danielle, he trailed off, realizing he had no idea where she had been 15 years ago. She was a student at State University, I said calmly. Just like Danielle, she was driving drunk, just as she had been arrested for twice before, and when she struck your sister in that parking lot, she drove away and let her mother help her cover it all up. Adam, don't listen to him, Grace pleaded, desperation in her voice. He's making it up. He's always hated me. But Adam was staring at her, seeing her for the first time. The scar, he said slowly. The scar on your hand. You told me it was from a cooking accident. His eyes widened. There was a witness, wasn't there? Someone who saw you that night, someone who remembered that scar. Grace's silence was her confession. Adam sank into a chair, his face in his hands. Oh my God, Grace, what did you do? I can explain, she sobbed. It was an accident. A terrible mistake. I've regretted it every single day. You've regretted it? I stepped toward her, my voice like ice. You regretted it so much, you changed your name and started a new life? You regretted it so much you married into the family of the girl you killed? You regretted it so much you wanted to name your own child after her? Adam's head snapped up. You wanted to name the baby Danielle out of guilt, he whispered, horrified. Not to honor my sister. Get out, he said, his voice deadly quiet. Get out of my house, right now. Adam, I'm pregnant with your child. You can't just... Get out, he screamed, tears streaming down his face. Get out before I call the police myself. The door slammed shut behind her, leaving my son and me in the ruins of his life. He collapsed into sobs, and I knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. The hunt was finally over. The next morning I called Colin. She knows, I said. It all came out last night. Damn it, Arthur. If she runs, she won't run, I interrupted. Her mother is likely advising her to stay put, to fight it. People like Grace Turner never believe they'll actually face consequences. 2 hours later, Colin called back. They're issuing the warrant. They're moving on it today, this afternoon, before she has time to react. At 2:47 p.m., I was back in the coffee shop across from Davidson Financial Services. At exactly 3, 2 unmarked police cars pulled up. I watched as 4 officers entered the building. 23 minutes later, they emerged, with Grace Turner between them, her hands cuffed behind her back. I had expected to feel a surge of triumph, but instead, a profound weariness settled over me. It was done. As they led her to the car, her eyes scanned the street and locked with mine. I saw the pure, unadulterated hatred in her gaze, and beneath it, the dawning realization that she had been utterly and completely outmaneuvered. I gave her a small, cold smile. This is for Danielle, and for Eleanor, for every single night of the last 15 years. Then the car door closed, and she was gone. The trial of Grace Turner began 6 months later. Adam did not attend. Grace had given birth to a daughter 3 days before the trial began, my granddaughter, who would only know her mother from behind prison glass. Adam had already filed for divorce. He named the baby Hope, a name for the future, not the past. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Laura Benton, was masterful. Frank Delaney's testimony was unshakable. But the pivotal moment came when I took the stand to deliver my victim impact statement. I had rehearsed it for months. "Your Honor," I began, my voice steady. 15 years ago, Grace Turner made a choice. She chose to drink and drive. She chose to leave my daughter to die in a parking lot. And she chose to protect herself instead of calling for help. Danielle Whitmore was 22 years old. She was kind, she was brilliant, and she was full of promise. Grace Turner stole all of that. I turned to face her directly. She didn't just steal my daughter's future. She stole my wife's will to live. Eleanor died of a broken heart 3 years later. Grace Turner made me a widower and a childless father. But worse than the act itself was the deception. For 15 years she lived a lie, even marrying into the very family she had destroyed. She had the unmitigated gall to suggest naming her child after the sister she murdered. I saw tears in the eyes of the jurors. Grace's face remained a cold, emotionless mask. "Your Honor, I am not here seeking vengeance. I am here seeking justice. Justice that has been delayed for 15 long years." The jury deliberated for 3 days. On the 4th day, they returned. On the charge of vehicular manslaughter in the 1st degree, how do you find? Guilty. On the charge of leaving the scene of an accident resulting in death, how do you find? Guilty. On the charge of insurance fraud, how do you find? Guilty. At the sentencing hearing a week later, Judge Martha Reynolds was unsparing. "Miss Turner, your actions after the incident, the name change, the insurance fraud, the systematic web of lies, demonstrate a pattern of calculated, self-serving behavior. You have shown no genuine remorse, only regret at having been caught." She paused, her gaze sweeping over me before landing back on Grace. "On the charge of vehicular manslaughter, this court sentences you to 15 years in state prison. On the charge of leaving the scene, this court sentences you to 5 years to run consecutively. On the charge of insurance fraud, 2 years, also to run consecutively, a total of 22 years. 22 years. She would be 58 when she was eligible for parole. My granddaughter, Hope, would be a grown woman. As the bailiff led her away, she looked at me one last time. I met her eyes, my expression unyielding. It wasn't enough to bring Danielle back, but it was justice. The next day, I drove to the cemetery, where my wife and daughter were buried side by side. I placed fresh flowers on their graves. "It's finished," I whispered to them. "He'll spend the next 2 decades in prison." I kept my promise, my sweet girl. Daddy got her. A few months later, I received a letter from Adam. He and Hope had moved across the country to start over. He was changing Hope's last name to Whitmore. "I want her to carry Danielle's name," he wrote. "I want her to know she comes from a family that fights for the truth." I smiled as I read the words. Grace Turner was appealing her conviction, but her mother had been disbarred for her role in the cover-up, and the family's name was in ruins. As for me, I was finally free. free from the crushing weight of not knowing, free from the cold rage that had been my constant companion for a decade and a half, free to finally begin to heal on a foundation of justice, finally, irrevocably served. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.